One of my big concerns about nuclear power is the economics of the game. Now, it's very hard to get your hands around a good economic estimate for nuclear power for a lot of reasons. One of the reasons I understand is that it's easy to build a cheap nuclear power plant that has low safety considerations, and then the more safety you add on, the more expensive it gets, and so on. But I still don't understand why it's so difficult. I mean, there's going to be an initial capital cost, there's going to be fuel costs, there's going to be maintenance costs, and there's going to be disposal costs. Mr. Esseltine, perhaps you could address that, what the difficulty is and where I could find good information on that that's easy to understand.
Sure, Congressman. Let me start with existing plants first and operating costs. I think there we've got a very good handle on that, as one of the previous speakers just pointed out. If you look at the existing fleet of 104 operating plants today in the United States, those plants are operating highly reliably with capacity factors in excess of 90%. And if you think about the need for refueling outages, that means those plants are operating just about as efficiently as they possibly can. We also know that fuel, operating and maintenance costs, waste disposal fees, taxes add up to about, say, 2.5 cents per kilowatt hour, in that range, which again is very comparable to what we see for large, efficient coal-fired power plants.
So that's your
today.
Operating costs, about
Those are
2.5
operating
cents.
costs. That's exactly right. So then the real question becomes, as you look at new nuclear plants, what is the capital cost of the plant going to be?
Right.
How confident are we that the plant will actually be built for that cost and will enter commercial operation when it is expected to? And the variables there are, first, commodity prices. We're seeing significant increases in prices for things like steel. There are, in some instances, very limited international suppliers for some of the components that are necessary for nuclear power plants. A good example is very heavy steel forgings, which are necessary for the reactor pressure vessels, steam generators. There's only one supplier in the world for those components today, and they control the market, and prices have been moving up as well. Second, it's been 20 years since we've built a nuclear power plant in this country. Many of the suppliers that supplied the existing plants are no longer available. If you went to most of the existing nuclear plants in this country, when those plants were built, virtually all of the equipment and components in those plants came from the United States. For the new nuclear plants that will be built around the world, including in the United States, if plants go forward, most of the components and equipment and supplies will come from international sources.
So what I'm basically hearing you saying is that the capital costs are going to be a determining factor, and it's going to be possibly high, and there's a lot of risk associated with this. So
exactly,
the lenders are going to want to take their part out of that risk.
And the same thing is true, quite frankly, for large new coal plants, especially using clean coal technology. You have the same risks and uncertainties. Marilyn can probably talk about how the industry and the companies are trying to get their arms around what those costs will be. When we get to the point where companies are signing firm orders to purchase a new nuclear power plant, which will be, in most instances, probably a few years from now, we'll have a better fix on exactly what those capital costs will be. The financing costs also then need to be determined, and for the purpose of investors will look at that investment and they'll say, how safe or how risky is this investment compared to building another type of generating plant within this industry, and what's the risk premium that needs to be built in for the capital costs. I believe that all of those costs can be dealt with, and you can end up with costs that are pretty comparable to what you would see for coal-fired generation, taking into account the financial support that the Congress provided in the Energy Policy Act, but we'll know with greater definition exactly what those costs are probably in a couple of years.
I wanted to talk a little bit about disposal too. I worked on disposal calculations as a graduate student at the New Mexico Waste Isolation Pilot Project. Any idea where we are with regard to credibility of geologic disposal, Mr. Fry?
The credibility, in terms of technical credibility, is, I think, pretty high. I mean, the National Academy of Sciences has said that that's ultimately to dispose of nuclear waste. fuel. The actual mechanism by which that's going to happen and the costs incident thereto are still pretty much up in the air. Yucca Mountain is not yet a project, and a number of alternatives to storing the spent fuel, perhaps on site. And I don't think good studies have been done of all of the array of options that are possible or their costs.
All right, thank you, Mr. Frey.
Thank you, Dr. McNerny.